What would you do if the very company you built your life around your second home tossed you aside the moment you grieved the man who raised you? I'm Daniela Cortez. I'm 38 years old, and for 9 years, I was the quiet engine behind Nexus One Logistics in Denver, Colorado. If you've ever received a last-minute delivery in the Rockies that somehow still made it on time, chances are I had something to do with it. I wasn't on the billboards or in the boardroom, but I was the backbone. People called me the human mainframe, not because I was cold, but because I kept everything running without ever breaking down. Vendor systems, freight coordination, internal protocols I'd built or fixed, most of them. No flashy titles, no awards on the wall, just spreadsheets and results. And Trevor was my supervisor, mid-40s, MBA from somewhere that sounded expensive. He transferred from Portland 3 years ago and immediately made it his job to take credit for everything I did. Daniela's on it, he'd say in meetings whenever the CEO asked how we were managing something impossible. It used to bother me. A little. But I found comfort in knowing I was the reason our contracts stayed intact. That I was the one vendors called when they needed solutions fast, not Trevor. Never Trevor. That Thursday, I was knee-deep in the Henderson account, our biggest client yet. I had built a full integration roadmap for them, detailing how their freight data would sync with our back-end systems, flag anomalies, reduce idle truck time, and save them close to $400K a year. Daniela, can you stay late tonight? The Henderson account needs some adjustments before tomorrow's presentation, Trevor said, standing by my cubicle with his usual fake urgency. It was the third time that week. I glanced at the clock, 4:30 p.m. I swallowed the frustration. Sure, Trevor. I'll get it sorted. The truth, I wasn't even annoyed anymore. Just tired. Tired in that invisible way hardworking women get when nobody sees how much they carry. I pulled up the files and dove in. That's when my phone buzzed. Grandpa Elias is asking for you again. The doctors say it might be soon. It was a text from my mom. Everything froze. My grandfather wasn't just my grandpa. He raised me after my parents died in a car crash when I was 12. He was a World War II vet, a man who survived poverty, war, and personal loss, and still chose to raise a broken girl with infinite patience and a quiet strength that never cracked. I told Jenna, the coworker next to me, just family stuff when she asked if I was okay, but my insides had turned to stone. I worked until past 8 p.m. that night, but my thoughts were elsewhere by his hospital bed. The call came 3 nights later, 2:00 a.m. I was awake before I even answered the phone. It's time my mother said, her voice barely holding together. I drove through the empty streets of Denver, the silence screaming louder than any noise. The lights of the hospital glowed like some alternate universe where time stopped and memories lived. Elias looked so small, but his eyes still sharp. There's my successful granddaughter, he whispered when he saw me. Tell me about work. Are they treating you right? I laughed through the tears and told him about the Henderson account, the protocols I was implementing, and how we were ahead of schedule. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. I taught you to work hard, but I also taught you to stand up for yourself. Don't let anyone make you small, Daniela. You're worth more than they know. Those were his last words to me. He passed away that Thursday morning with my hand in his and my mother stroking his forehead, and I made a silent promise I would carry his name with the dignity he gave me, no matter what came next. The funeral arrangements naturally fell to me. I was the organized one, the fixer, even in grief. That Friday, I walked into Trevor's office with formal bereavement paperwork in hand. I'll need 4 days. There are family obligations, veteran arrangements, and people flying in from out of state, I said, sliding the paper across his desk. He didn't even look up. 4 days seems excessive, Daniela. Can't you handle this over a weekend? It took everything in me not to explode. Instead, I replied, he raised me. He was a veteran. This isn't just a funeral, it's a goodbye to the man who taught me everything I know about discipline, loyalty, and service. Trevor sighed like he was the one being burdened. Fine, he grumbled, but make sure your projects are fully covered. I don't want any mess while you're gone. I already drafted transition notes, I said calmly. I'll have everything updated and documented. And I did. I sent emails, tutorials, and even recorded walkthrough videos for the Henderson integration. I stayed late again, making sure my absence wouldn't cost the team a single minute. That night at 9:15 p.m., Trevor sent me a cold one-line approval email approved. Return Monday. As I shut down my computer, I remember thinking, Grandpa, I did this right. I made sure they'd be okay. What I didn't know was that my efficiency, my thoroughness, my decency would be used as justification to cut me loose, like old software no one remembered how to use. But the betrayal hadn't even begun. The funeral was everything Grandpa Elias would have wanted, dignified, precise, heartfelt. The 3-volley salute echoed across the Colorado plains like a final heartbeat, and I stood beside his casket at Fort Logan National Cemetery trying to stay strong. Relatives I hadn't seen in years flew in my cousin Miguel from Phoenix, Aunt Teresa from Albuquerque. We swapped stories through quiet tears, how Grandpa Elias once welded a broken fence with a butter knife, how he insisted on mowing his own lawn well into his 80s, how he kept every one of my promotions printed and taped to his fridge. But what shook me was what we found Saturday evening. We were sorting through his papers when I opened an old cedar box in the closet. Inside were medals he'd never shown anyone, commendation letters from his commanding officer, and a worn leather-bound journal. Taped to the inside cover was a folded note to Daniela. Never settle for crumbs when you've baked the bread. You lead, not follow. Love, Grandpa. I sat on the floor with that letter in my lap, stunned. He had seen it coming, the way I was being used, minimized, overworked. Somehow, even in his final days, he'd left me one last lesson. Stop playing small for people who can't handle your full value. By Sunday, I had finalized all burial arrangements with the Veterans Administration. Every form was double-checked, every loose end tied. I did it all with the same precision I brought to logistics rollouts. I returned home that night exhausted but ready to step back into the rhythm of work. My 4 days were over. I had done everything right, left no mess behind, caused no disruption, just like always. But Monday morning was different. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., earlier than usual, ready to pick up where I left off. The lobby was quiet, a little too quiet. I badged in and made my way to my desk. My computer screen was black. I jiggled the mouse. Nothing. I hit the keyboard. Still nothing. And then the words appeared, "Access denied. Contact IT administrator." For a split second, I thought it was a glitch. Maybe the system auto-deactivated accounts after time off. Then Jenna walked up. Her face was pale nervous. "Trevor wants to see you, right away." I grabbed my coffee mug and headed down the hallway toward his office, still half believing there had to be a technical reason for the login issue. I knocked. "Morning, Trevor. I'm back ready to dive in." He didn't even look up. "Actually, Daniela, there's been a change." That sentence hit me in the chest like ice water. A change, I asked, trying to keep my voice level. He finally turned toward me, his tone sterile. "We've decided to go in a different direction with your position. Your employment with Nexus One is terminated, effective immediately." I blinked. "I'm sorry." "What?" "It's a business decision. Your role has been eliminated." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Trevor, you approved my bereavement leave. I followed every protocol. All my projects were transitioned. My notes were documented." He shrugged. "Approval doesn't mean endorsement. This company needs people who demonstrate unwavering commitment. Taking 4 days off, even for personal reasons, sends a message." The blood drained from my face. I buried the man who raised me. I said, my voice sharp. "A W2O veteran who stepped up when no one else did. And you're telling me that choosing to honor him was, what disloyal that's touching," he replied, tone clipped and condescending. "But business doesn't pause for grief. Your decision to prioritize personal matters made it clear where your dedication lies." I stood there realizing this wasn't about the funeral. This was a setup. Trevor had waited until I was vulnerable, until I was out of the building, until he could make his move without me fighting back. "I'd like to speak to Helen," I said, referring to our CEO. "She's always supported my work. She'll want to know." "She's aware," Trevor interrupted, "and she supports the decision." He was lying. I knew he was lying. Helen had personally praised me in performance reviews. She once said, if I had 3 more Danielas, we'd be dominating the West Coast. But I didn't argue, because right then I remembered what Grandpa had said. Dignity over drama, even when they don't deserve it. "So what's the process?" I asked quietly. "How do I transition out?" Trevor looked slightly thrown. He was expecting rage, maybe tears, not calm. "Security will escort you to collect your belongings. Your access is already disabled. And the Henderson account, I'm the only one who understands the full integration. Who's taking that over?" "We'll figure it out," he said, faking confidence. "No one is irreplaceable." I nodded slowly. No one is irreplaceable. We'd see about that. I walked back to my desk where a security guard, Pete, an older man who always smiled on night shifts, was waiting awkwardly. "Miss Cortez," he said gently, "I'm sorry. This doesn't seem right." "Thank you, Pete," I said, meaning it. Jenna was watching. So were Carlos and Diane from payroll. No one said a word, but their silence screamed volumes. They knew. They all knew. As I packed my things, a mug-framed photo of Grandpa and me, my little Data Queen nameplate, I felt something strange rising in me. It wasn't humiliation. It was clarity. I wasn't broken. I was done playing small, because Trevor had just made the biggest mistake of his career. As I stepped into the elevator for the last time, cardboard box in hand, the polished steel doors reflected not defeat, but awakening. Outside, the morning sun hit the Rockies with that bright, biting clarity Denver is known for. I took a long breath. Grandpa Elias used to say, "Sometimes you need to climb the mountain to see how small the valley really was." Nexus 1. It was just a valley, and Trevor. A tiny man in a cheap suit who mistook power for intelligence. At home, I placed the box on the kitchen counter and poured a mug of coffee, my first cup as an unemployed woman. Except, I didn't feel unemployed. I felt unchained. I opened my laptop and started taking inventory, not of my belongings, but of my skills. 9 years of operational systems knowledge, personal contacts at over 30 vendors, a reputation for getting freight moving when no one else could, and no non-compete clause in my contract. That last one, a detail I triple-checked before making my next move. By noon, I had drafted a plan, Cortez Consulting, a solo logistics strategy firm offering system optimization, vendor negotiations, and freight analytics. It wasn't just an act of survival, it was a declaration of independence. I built a sleek professional website using a template registered in LLC and started making quiet waves. By 3 p.m., I had already reached out to 3 former vendors and 5 ex-colleagues now working in other firms. My pitch was simple. You already know my work. If you need results without red tape, I'm available. Sandra Rodriguez from Front Range Shipping responded within the hour. "Daniela, I heard what happened. Nexus 1's loss. I've got 3 clients who desperately need someone like you. Can we talk tomorrow?" I exhaled slowly. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. By Wednesday, I had signed my first 2-week contract, my daily rate more than I earned in a week at Nexus 1, and I wasn't babysitting anyone's ego anymore. I worked from my kitchen table with coffee in hand, my late grandfather's folded journal resting nearby, open to a page that read, "If they can't see your value, go build where they will." I implemented a logistic streamlining plan for Sandra's client in 5 days. Their bottlenecks gone, their invoice paid, their referral immediate. Word spread faster than I expected. Efficiency is a currency in logistics, and I had just opened my own bank. Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Maya Chen, a brilliant operations manager who'd left Nexus 1 6 months earlier after clashing with, you guessed it, Trevor. Her voice was low urgent. "Daniela, I just heard. I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to repeat it yet." I paused. "I promise." What's going on? She exhaled sharply. Trevor's been taking credit for your Henderson integration. I sat in a board meeting 2 weeks ago where he pitched your protocols like they were his. Helen was so impressed she's considering promoting him to regional. I felt my blood go cold, but not from fear, from clarity. This was never about company culture. Trevor had seen the Henderson project as his meal ticket, but he couldn't execute the work, so he had me build it, then used my bereavement leave to erase me from the picture. He'd weaponized my grief to steal my legacy. I didn't say anything for a moment, just stared out at the mountains through my window, steady and unmoving, like Grandpa Elias had always been. Maya. I said finally, I think Trevor just set himself up for the biggest crash of his career. That night, I went back into the Henderson files, not from the Nexus system, but from my own archived backups. I had saved my original drafts, integration maps, and access credentials for personal record keeping. I reviewed them like blueprints to a machine no one else knew how to fix, and I smiled, because when you build the machine, you know exactly which bolts they'll never find. Friday morning, I started receiving texts. Jenna. The Henderson system is down. Trevor's panicking. Helen's flying in from Chicago. Carlos from accounting. He's blaming everyone, but no one even knows how the files connect. By noon, I received a call from an unknown number. Helen Brackmore. I let it ring to voicemail. Daniela, this is Helen. I need to discuss a serious situation with you. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. I didn't. Instead, I reviewed a proposal for a 6-month consulting project from a Seattle logistics firm. They'd found me through a vendor I'd helped 5 years ago. The offer was triple my old salary. At 2 p.m., Helen called again. This time her voice cracked a little in the message. We've lost all shipping data from Henderson. Freight is stalled in 4 states. They're threatening to terminate unless we resolve this in 72 hours. Trevor assured me your systems were covered. But it's clear now that wasn't true. I closed my laptop. Trevor had walked into the boardroom wearing my clothes. But when the seams split, I was the tailor they needed. But I wasn't selling stitches. I was done sewing up other people's lies. That evening, I watched the sun dip behind the mountains, wine in hand, Grandpa's journal beside me. He had said to lead, not follow. And now I wasn't following anyone. By Saturday morning, the silence from Nexus 1 felt louder than ever. And I knew what that silence meant. They were scrambling. Trevor was sweating. And Helen. She was trying to fix a $2 million disaster using duct tape and denial. But here's the thing about people like Trevor, they don't realize the systems they steal are alive, built through nuance, trial, error, late nights, and gut instincts. Not just bullet points on a PowerPoint slide. He thought he could fire the architect and still live inside the house. But the foundation, it was crumbling. By Sunday night, I'd officially signed the contract with the Seattle firm. 6 months. Full design of a supply chain overhaul. No unnecessary meetings. No middlemen. Just clarity, autonomy, and respect. I slept better that night than I had in years. Then Monday came, and with it, the moment I'd been expecting. At exactly 10:02 a.m., my phone rang again. Helen Brackmore. This time I answered. Her voice was different, strained tight like she'd aged a decade over the weekend. Daniela. She began quickly, thank you for picking up. I know you're probably frustrated, but I need your help. I said nothing, just waited. She continued. The Henderson integration failed completely. All 4 distribution centers are backed up. We've lost client access to the database. They're threatening to walk away. I took a sip of coffee. And I'd like to offer you a consulting contract, your standard rate, of course, plus a completion bonus. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the snow-capped peaks. I'm not available for that kind of work, I said simply. There was a pause. Then she said, confused, what do you mean you're not available? I've taken on other clients, ones who valued my contributions from the beginning. I'm not in crisis response mode for companies that see me as disposable. Her tone shifted. Defensive now. Daniela, I don't think you understand how serious this is. This isn't about ego or office drama. We're talking about losing our biggest client." "Oh, I understand," I replied. "And I understand you didn't question Trevor when he claimed my work as his own. You watched him fire me while I was burying the man who raised me. You didn't just lose an employee, you lost trust." She sighed, her voice softening. "You're right. I should have looked deeper. Trevor said you were replaceable, but clearly you're not." I said nothing, and the silence stretched. Then in a quieter voice, she added, "Trevor may be on his way out. The board isn't happy. If you came back, even just as a consultant, you could write your own terms." Tempting. But not tempting enough. Because I finally understood power isn't in what they offer you after the fact. It's in what you choose to walk away from. "I appreciate the call, Helen," I said calmly. "But I'm not interested." Her voice cracked. "You'd really let us fail?" I smiled faintly. "No, Trevor already did that." I ended the call and returned to my consulting dashboard. 2 new inquiries, 3 glowing reviews, and 1 message from Sandra that read, "Client says you're a magician. They've never seen smoother operations. And here's the truth, no company brochure will ever print. They don't remember who kept the engine running until the wheels fall off. Trevor had gambled that he could erase me quietly, but the fallout, that would echo loudly, because by firing me, he didn't just lose a loyal employee. He lost the one person who knew how everything worked. And the best part, he wouldn't realize the full extent of his mistake until it was far too late." Tuesday morning, the fallout began to surface. Jenna texted me just before noon Trevor got pulled from the Henderson account. "Board's demanding answers. HR is reviewing your termination paperwork. It was happening faster than I expected. You see, when you remove a keystone, the entire arch collapses. Trevor thought he could patch over my absence with vague handoffs and last-minute emails. But what he didn't understand, what he never understood, was that institutional knowledge isn't just data. It's instinct, context, history. And Trevor had none of that. He'd played chess with someone who wasn't even on the board anymore, and still lost." Later that afternoon, a message arrived from Maya. Trevor tried to repitch the Henderson integration plan in today's meeting. Helen shredded him, called out inconsistencies in the data. He couldn't answer basic timeline questions. It was brutal. I didn't smile. Not exactly. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was confirmation. That everything I had poured into Nexus One, all the nights I stayed late, the holidays I worked through, the weekends I spent debugging integrations, none of it was ever wasted. Because I knew what Trevor never would. You can't fake competence. Wednesday morning, I received a package on my doorstep. No return label. Just my name written in neat block letters. Inside was a slim leather-bound folder and a note. "Found this in Grandpa's keepsake box. Thought you should have it. Mom." It was Elias's military journal, one he must have kept during the Korean War. Inside, sandwiched between yellowed pages and fading ink, was a small scrap of lined paper. Folded 3 times, his handwriting was unmistakable. "Daniela, if they ever try to make you small, remember this. You were raised by giants. Lead. Don't ask permission to stand tall." I clutched that note like armor. Trevor had tried to diminish me, but he hadn't broken me. Thursday evening, I got the text that sealed his fate. Jenna Henderson account officially terminated their contract. Board furious. Trevor's future looks bleak. Word spread fast in the logistics community. A client that big pulling out was the equivalent of a financial earthquake. Nexus One's competitors began circling like vultures, offering Henderson cleaner integrations, faster turnaround systems they could trust. Trevor, from what I heard, tried to frame it as a transition challenge, but the cracks were already too wide. The next morning, Helen called again. I answered not because I needed closure, but because I wanted clarity. "Daniela." She began, voice brittle. "I owe you an apology." "No need," I replied. "I've moved on." She was quiet for a long beat. "I believe you have. I just wanted you to hear it from me." Trevor's been removed from all active projects. We've brought in an external review team to rebuild the systems. But they don't have my notes I finished for her." "No," she admitted, "they don't." Then she added, "If you ever reconsider, I won't." It wasn't spite. It wasn't anger. It was just truth. Because going back would have been like trying to live in a house that had once locked you out during a storm. You might forgive, but you don't forget the cold. Instead, I poured everything into Cortez Consulting. My client list doubled by the end of the month. Companies sought me out, not just for my systems, but for how I carried myself, quietly, powerfully, without burning bridges, even when I had every right to. Sandra introduced me at a panel as the woman who built freight architecture in the Rockies. I smiled, shook hands, accepted the compliment, but the real reward came in the form of a quiet email from Henderson's director of operations, Daniela. "We finally figured out what happened. It's clear you were the architect behind the system. If you're ever open to working directly with us, we'd welcome it." I never replied, because by then I had already signed a year-long contract with a Fortune 100 logistics firm, complete with remote options equity share and a consulting rate 5 times higher than my salary at Nexus One. Trevor, last I heard, he'd been demoted and transferred to a junior position in Phoenix. His LinkedIn title had changed from senior operations executive to available for new opportunities. The Henderson loss had rippled outward. 3 more clients left. Helen brought in new leadership, and Nexus One's presence in Colorado permanently scarred, all because one man tried to erase the woman who built the map. By the time Denver's first snow dusted the rooftops in November, I was already months into a new chapter. My days no longer revolved around corporate fire drills or Trevor's ego-driven panic requests. Now I started each morning with a fresh brew, a full calendar of meaningful work, and a quiet kind of peace. Cortez Consulting wasn't just thriving, it was evolving. I'd hired 2 assistants, onboarded my 3rd long-term client, and had finally learned how to set boundaries that once felt impossible. No more can you stay late again. No more sacrificing family health or dignity for the illusion of job security. Clients respected me, trusted me, paid me on time, referred me without hesitation, and the best part, I didn't have to beg for any of it. One Saturday afternoon, while organizing some personal papers, I found myself flipping back through Grandpa Elias's journal. There was a page I hadn't noticed before, likely stuck behind another. It was a simple list, handwritten and worn at the corners. Things I want Daniela to remember. Work is not family. Titles don't define worth. Never apologize for setting a boundary. Loyalty is a gift, never wasted on the ungrateful. When they push you out of the room, build your own. I stared at that list for a long time, his familiar handwriting echoing louder than any office memo or corporate handbook ever had. That was the real promotion. That was the raise I'd needed all along the permission to honor my own value. Weeks later, I heard through a colleague that Trevor's demotion hadn't stopped the bleeding. Nexus One had lost another major client. Helen, under pressure from the board, brought in a high-priced consulting firm to try and replicate the systems I once built for free systems they no longer understood. It wasn't revenge. It was reality. They hadn't fired me. They'd unplugged their operating system and then wondered why nothing worked. The best part, I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to trash anyone online. My silence said more than any headline could, because while they were busy covering up mistakes, I was building something that actually mattered. And that brings me to something I rarely say, but now I'm proud of myself. Proud of. Not just for surviving what Trevor did, but for choosing not to let that betrayal define me. It would have been easy to spiral, to doubt myself, to shrink into a smaller, safer version of me. But instead, I built the thing they never expected. A life that didn't include them at all. And in a full-circle twist, I could never have written better myself. One of my newest clients turned out to be a former Henderson executive who had jumped ship after the fallout. We didn't talk about Trevor. We didn't have to. All he said was, "I've followed your work for years." We're lucky to have you now. Funny. That word lucky. It used to mean getting chosen, getting noticed. Now it meant choosing myself. If you've made it this far, maybe you're where I was not too long ago. Maybe someone underestimated you. Maybe they used you, took credit for your work, told you to your face that your grief wasn't worth 4 days off. Maybe someone told you that your seat at the table came with conditions. Let me tell you, they were wrong. You don't owe loyalty to people who discard you the moment it's inconvenient. You don't have to earn the right to be treated with respect. And you don't have to ask permission to lead. You're not small. You're not replaceable. You're not the problem. Sometimes they only see your worth when they no longer have access to it. Let them see it from the outside. Let them sit in boardrooms full of chaos and finally whisper the name they threw away. And while they do, you work in peace. You rise in silence. You build the future they never thought you could. Because dignity isn't loud. It's undeniable. Have you ever been underestimated by those closest to you? What did it take for you to reclaim your worth? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this hit home, like and subscribe for more true stories of betrayal, strength, and the quiet revenge of rising higher. I'm Daniela Cortez, and I didn't just survive, I outgrew them.